Catus Maximus here, this time with a review of the Tekton 1706 3/4 inch drive long handle breaker bar. I did include a part number for this. I know I'm notorious, but I figured this is one that people would be interested in. I only paid $60 for this breaker bar. Tekton does have a lifetime warranty on their tools, but a lot of the retailers don't deal with that. It's a mail-in warranty, and so it's only so effective. That's one thing about lifetime warranties, such as this breaker bar, which is pretty nicely made and very competitively priced. But part of the deal is that it's much harder to warranty because you would have to mail this in. And on a 3-foot long, 15-pound wrench, it's not going to be cheap to mail that in. So I did want to mention that. Although I believe there are some retailers who will in-house do the Tekton warranties, but I'm not exactly sure who. So a reason to get a big breaker bar like this, obviously, is because of the additional leverage. There's lots of nice breaker bars out there, such as the Harbor Freight long 24-inch long handle. What I've noticed about these is they've done, there's some big tool sites that have done tests of these. These breaker bars are pretty nice. And they even show some of their flex. What they don't really tell you is that on a 2-foot long breaker bar, it's surprising how much twisting, or excuse me, how much flexing you're getting on this. And if you get a long extension, it's even more twisty. And it ends up kind of being a funky situation because you have all this tension built up in the breaker bar. And then when the bolt releases, it really releases pretty violently because not only does the bolt break, but then it's accelerated by all the spring tension that's been built up into this. So that's one reason to really get larger size breaker bars, is they're just much more rigid. You're much more strength as compared to what you're using, and instead of the work that you're doing being applied to spring tension and sudden fastener release, these are much more connected, and all your force just goes to turning the fastener. When they break a little bit and then they creak their way out. This is indeed a 36-inch, so if this is the Harbor Freight, and we can just get the Harbor Freight in frame, the handle of this Tekton extends quite a bit beyond. Just to give you an idea, if I can get this to work out, you still can't even see the Tekton, and the Harbor Freight's head is still matched up with it. I think it's about 16 inches longer, or it's probably just a foot longer, excuse me. But it kind of looks a bit longer than that. Another thing to mention is head size. Huge is huge. Now, breaker bars that use this style of head versus this style of head this is larger, it's heavier, it's more bulky, and the anvil sits farther away from the bar itself. But there's just, as you can see, a lot more metal, a lot more material in there. And so they use these fork type of breaker bars because they're more compact in the head, but they're just not as strong as if you reverse it. And then the handle itself has the eyelet, and then the fork is on the head, because then you can have a lot more material added to it. Tekton advertises this as a chrome molybdenum steel head with a chrome vanadium steel handle. It's upside down, but they indeed stamp chrome vanadium, and they do stamp Tekton, which is nice. Some Tekton tools just have no markings on them whatsoever. And generally speaking, it's a really nice large breaker bar. So with 3/4 inch sockets, it's great. With a huge breaker bar like this, you can't even demonstrate. It's like a walking stick. If you stand up next to you, it's as tall as your hips. Is now when people say, "Oh, I had this really tough suspension fastener," or "I had a Honda crankshaft pulley bolt," or an axle hub nut. When you use a wrench like this, they're nothing. Even if they're rusted or whatever, it's not a real issue at all. Wrenches like these, if you work in heavier industry, trucks, diesel, agriculture, any kind of industrial service and maintenance. There's a viewer who left a message or a comment about working in a quarry, and so this is a tool in a place like that where you would use it much more often, especially with large fasteners such as this 2.5-inch socket. Just to give you an idea, I did buy a 19mm 3/4 inch drive socket just for those Honda pulley bolts. One of the first ones I worked on, I had a friend, and we had broken a 3/4 inch to 1/2 inch drive reducer, and I just got this and used this wrench, and it was no issue. The bolt that broke the reducer just felt like It was nothing with this setup. In this, there's a huge disparity, as you can see, 2.5 inch versus 19 millimeter. And so obviously with a large socket, a big old wrench like this is absolutely necessary because your leverage angle is only related to the diameter. Smaller sockets you get more leverage on than larger sockets. As well as using things like very large, like this 24 millimeter hex socket. Socket head cap screws that are this large, almost an inch, oftentimes have huge amounts of torque. And the final note about a big 3/4 inch breaker bar is if you are going to use a reducer, I would have to recommend the specific snap-on. Of all the reducers I've seen, and I did a big adapter and reducer video, and I have a lot of those things, none of them are built like the snap-on, where they use a very hard steel drive square that's inserted into a heavy-duty socket. So instead of relying on just whatever material to balance with the strength and durability of a socket, they use a socket and then a very strong hard piece of steel to reduce the drive square from shearing. And as a result of that, the drive square can be replaced. You don't have to replace the whole socket. Anyway, that was the end of this review of this huge Tekton 3/4 inch breaker bar, and it's probably one of the most competitively priced ones on the market. And it's just great. It's great in the collection, especially if you have any friends who are into tools and they see just a massive 3-foot long breaker bar with a beam that's almost 3/4 of an inch thick. And the last thing I'll note on the Tekton is they had a spring for head tension, and it had a little bit of a gap, and I didn't really like that. So what I've done here is I had some washers. These are actually diaphragms out of cordless drill gearboxes, so they're high-grade steel. And so I shimmed it up, and so the head is a bit tighter and doesn't want to rotate back and forth. That's one thing I'll mention, is I wish the fitment was just a little bit tighter, but it can easily be fixed at home. Once again, thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe. Catus Maximus out.